The frost came early that year, before the leaves had properly finished falling, so that the drive up to Ferncombe Hall was a carpet of brown and white together, crackling under the wheels of the carts. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet stone, and underneath it of tallow, because the house was old and burned its candles down to the last inch before it would spend on new ones. It was the kind of house that kept its accounts close, and its silences closer. Grace Hollis had been a housemaid there 11 weeks. She was not the sort of girl a room noticed. Small, brown-haired, quick with her hands and slow with her opinions, unless asked for them directly, she moved through the corridors of Ferncombe, the way water moves through a house with old pipes. Present everywhere and seen nowhere. She had come with one box, one reference from a vicar who was dead now, and one black notebook stitched at the spine, her father's, full of his small, cramped hand on the subject of fevers and poultices, and which root did what to which ailment. He had been the village apothecary. He had died of a fever he could not cure in himself, which she had never told anyone at Ferncombe, because it was the kind of fact people used to decide what to expect of you. Before the candle in her hand had burned another inch that night, the house would learn 2 things about itself. It would take most of a year before it admitted either one. It was past midnight. The stable boy, Tom Rafferty, 10 years old and orphaned twice over, first by his mother, and then by a stable yard that had no particular use for a boy who could not yet lift a saddle unaided, had been kicked by a green horse 3 days before and left, by the steward's reckoning, to mend or not mend on his own time. Mr. Croft did not trouble the house physician for stable boys. Grace had seen the boy's face at supper, grey and sweating, and had said nothing, because saying something had not worked the first 2 times. She had bread from her own plate wrapped in a cloth. She had turned to willow bark and yarrow in her father's book, and boiled a poultice on the banked kitchen fire when the cook had gone up, and she had her own candle, cheaply made, guttering already in the draught of the back stair. She did not wake anyone. She did not ask leave. She told herself, going down, that she would have done the same for any dog in the yard, and this was true, and it was also why no one would have stopped her if she had asked, and why she did not ask. The back stair at Ferncombe was narrow and unlit past the second landing, a servant's passage that ran behind the good staircase like a poor relation behind a rich one. It smelled of dust and mice and old plaster. Grace went down it holding her skirt in one hand and the candle in the other, counting the steps the way she always did in the dark, from habit, not fear. She did not know that above her, at the top of that same stair, a man had been standing some minutes already, in the dark, in a banyan thrown over his nightshirt, unable to sleep for reasons of his own that had nothing to do with stable boys or bread. He had heard a door. He had not moved to challenge it. He only watched the small light go down and away from him, and did not yet know why he did not call out. The stable was warmer than the house, being full of animals, and it smelled of hay and leather and horse, which Grace had come to find, in 11 weeks, a kinder smell than beeswax. Tom was awake when she came in, curled small in the straw of the loft above the stalls, and he did not cry when he saw her, because he had already decided, the way children who are handled roughly decide such things early, that crying changed nothing. "You should not have come," he said. It was the only thing he said for some time. "No," she agreed, "I should be asleep." "So should you, only properly, in a bed, which is a different thing." She set the poultice against his ribs, where the bruise had gone the colour of a thundercloud, and fed him the bread in small pieces because his stomach would not hold much, and sat with her back against a post while he slept, and did not leave until his breathing had gone slow, and even under her hand. She did not think of it as courage. She thought of it, if she thought of it at all, as the only thing to be done, which was the whole of her philosophy in 6 words, and she had never once said them aloud to anyone. It was near 2 a.m. when she came back up the stair, tired through, the candle down to a stub, and found Mr. Croft waiting for her on the 2nd landing, with a lamp of his own, and an expression she had learned to be wary of in the first fortnight. "Well," he said, "and what has the new girl been at, this time of night?" She did not answer at once. She had learned that too. "Bread," he said, before she could. He held up her own empty cloth, which she had left folded on the kitchen table, and which he had plainly gone looking for, meaning he had known where she was before she came up. Kitchen bread, that is counted of a morning, and was 1 short at supper. And now you come up the back stair at 2 in the clock smelling of the stable, with your apron dirty. Shall I tell you what that looks like, Miss Hollis, or shall you tell me? "I took the bread," she said. "The boy is fevered, and no one has sent for a physician. I did not think 1 heel of bread would be missed before it was bread it went to. If you must report me, report me. Must I?" he said, and came a step nearer, and put his lamp down on the sill, which she noted, because it left both his hands free, which she also noted. Or we might come to some other arrangement about it. A girl new to a place, no character but a dead vicar's word, caught thieving in the night. That is a very short road to a very long walk, with no reference at the end of it. I could forget I saw you tonight, Miss Hollis. There is very little I would ask, for a favour that size. She stood very still. She did not step back, because the wall was at her back already, and there was nowhere in it to go, and she did not look away from him, because she had found, over 11 weeks, that looking away was the thing that invited a man to come closer. "I have nothing you want," she said, "that I would give for silence." "Everyone has something," he said, and put his hand to the wall beside her head, not touching her, only closing the last of the room around her, and she understood that he intended to see how long she would hold still under that before she understood him. She held still. She did not cry. She had trained herself, over a longer time than 11 weeks, not to cry where it showed. "Let her go up," said a voice from the dark above them, on the stair, quiet and entirely without heat, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised, because it had never once needed to be raised in its life to be obeyed. Croft's lamp threw only so much light. The man above them was a shape more than a face, a height and a set of shoulders in the gloom past the 3rd step, and something in the plainness of the words, and something else in the stillness with which they were delivered, took the strength directly out of Croft's arm before his mind had caught up to being afraid. "Sir," Croft said, to the dark, in quite a different voice than the one he had been using a moment before, and stepped back from the wall, and took up his lamp, and went, without once asking who had spoken, which told Grace something about him that she filed away without yet knowing what to do with it. She looked up the stair. The candle in her own hand had almost nothing left to give. By the time she had found the shape of him again in what light remained, he had already gone back the way he had come, unhurried, and there was only the empty dark at the top of the steps, and the smell of tallow, and her own heartbeat, which she noticed, distinctly, was steady. She did not know then that the voice on the stair belonged to Julian Ashworth, 9th Duke of Ferncombe, master of the house in which she had worked 11 weeks, and whose face she had never once seen by daylight. She did not know that he had stood at his study window an hour earlier, watching her cross the yard with a candle and a bundle, and had gone down the back stair after her for no reason he could yet have named aloud, and that from that night forward he found himself listening, in every room he entered, for the particular quiet way she had of not asking to be noticed. She only knew that she had not been made to give anything for her silence, and did not think to wonder very hard why, being tired, and being, in the end, no more than a girl who had gone to see to a sick boy and wanted her bed. She told no one what had passed on the stair. Not Mrs. Dell, who ran the house with a dry eye for everything in it, and would certainly have wanted to know. Not the other maids, who would have made a tale of it by breakfast. She told herself there was nothing to tell that would not cost her more than it gained her, a new girl's word against a steward's, and she had learned that particular arithmetic early in life, and never once seen it come out in her favour. What she could not entirely account for, over the following days, was Tom. A physician came for him on the Thursday, sent up from the village, and would not say who had sent him, only that his account was settled and there was nothing owing. The boy was moved from the loft to a proper bed in the coachman's quarters, where there was a fire. Miss Croft, when Grace passed him in the yard, did not meet her eye, and did not speak to her again for a fortnight, which she took, at first only for shame at having been caught, and did not examine further. "You look as though you have swallowed a puzzle," said Mrs. Dell, catching her at it over the linen press. "I only wonder who paid for the doctor," Grace said. "Someone with the money to spare, and no taste for having it known," said Mrs. Dell, in the tone of a woman folding a sheet and not looking up from it, which Grace understood, correctly, to mean that Mrs. Dell knew perfectly well who, and did not intend to say. "There is more of that in this house than you would credit, Miss Hollis. Doors mended, debts settled, not a name on any of it. You will learn not to ask if you stay." "I was not thanked for the boy," Grace said. "I do not want thanks. I would have done it for any creature in that state." "I know it," said Mrs. Dell, and something in her face, brief and gone again, suggested she thought this the correct answer, and had been listening for it. Grace was moved, within the week, from the scullery rotation to the dusting of the east wing, which included the library, a change Mrs. Dell announced without explanation, and which Grace did not question, being glad of lighter work and a warmer room, and not yet in the habit of wondering why warmth and lightness had begun to find her, of late, in a house that had shown her neither in her first month. She did not know that the physician's bill had gone, unsigned, to the Duke's own steward of accounts, a different man than Croft, kept separate for exactly such purposes. She did not know that Julian Ashworth had stood at the top of the back stair 3 nights running after the first, for no reason he would have owned to, and had gone away again each time before she came up, because he had decided, in the manner of a man arguing with himself and losing, that watching was not the same as intruding, and told himself this was sufficient reason to keep doing it. He had not slept well since his brother died, 2 winters back, and less well again since the autumn had come round to the season of it, and told himself the wakefulness that took him to the window that first night was only that, and nothing to do with a small light crossing a dark yard. He had been engaged once, before his brother's death made him duke, and changed what was expected of him. Her name did not matter now. He had told himself so many times that it had become nearly true. What he had not managed to unlearn was the evening he had seen her, in a moment she believed private, speak to a housemaid who had spilled a tray as though the girl were something less than a person, and smile a moment later at him as though nothing had happened. He had broken it off within the month. He had told no one the real reason, because it seemed, put plainly, a small thing to end a betrothal over, and yet it had told him everything he needed, and he had never once been able to make himself regret trusting it. He did not, therefore, trust Manners easily after that. He trusted, if he trusted anything, what a person did when no one of consequence appeared to be looking. He had not meant to make a study of Grace Hollis. It had simply become difficult, in the weeks since the Stair, to stop. The library at Ferncombe ran the length of the east front, and held, along with several thousand books nobody in the family had opened in a generation, one man who came and went by a private stair and was known to the staff, when he was known at all, as Mr. Ashworth, which was true as far as it went, being his own family name, and which Grace knew enough not to have learned the Duke's surname at all, only his title, took for the name of some connection of the house set to work cataloguing its shelves. He kept irregular hours and plainer dress than she would have credited to a gentleman, and he did not look up. The first several times she dusted round him, which she found restful rather than rude. "You read," he said finally, on a grey afternoon in November, not looking up from his own book, when she had paused a moment too long over the spine of one on his table. "A little," she said. "My father kept a shop. He taught me my letters so I could read him his own labels back when his eyes went bad. An apothecary." "Yes, and is that book of his any good?" he said, with a small dry nod toward the black notebook she carried, tucked always in her apron pocket, which she had not realized he had noticed, or is it mostly superstition dressed as physic? "It cured a woman of the ague in this parish last winter, when the physician had given her over," Grace said, without heat, setting down her cloth. "I would not call that superstition. I would call it observing which weed does which thing to which ailment, written down so as not to have to learn it twice. That is precisely what a physician does," he said, "only he is paid more for saying it in Latin." She had not expected to be answered so, and found, to her own surprise, the corner of her mouth moving before she could stop it, which she suppressed at once as unbecoming to the work she was meant to be doing, and he saw her suppress it and said nothing further, though something in his own face eased for the length of a breath, and then was put away again just as quickly. "You do not smile easily," she said before she had decided to say it. "No," he said. "I have not had a great deal of practice lately." She did not ask why. He did not offer why. It was, she thought afterward, exactly the sort of exchange in which nothing at all was said, and everything necessary had somehow been understood, and she went back to her dusting, and he went back to his book, and neither of them mentioned it again that day, though she found herself, over the following weeks, arranging to be in the library rather more often than the dust strictly required. It was in one of those weeks that she learned, from the boot boy, that Tom Rafferty's mother's people, 3 streets away in the village, had had a debt at the shop quietly cleared, and that no one would say by whom, and Grace, hearing it, thought of the physician, and of her own lighter duties, and of a plain unsmiling man in a library who asked odd, exact questions about apothecaries' daughters, and did not yet put the pieces together, because the last piece she needed was a name she did not have. Lady Priscilla Marchmont came to Ferncombe for the whole of December, as she came every winter, being the late Duke's cousin by marriage, and since there was no duchess in the house to do it, the self-appointed governor of everything in it, from the placement of candles to the character of the maids. She had brought with her, as she generally did, her goddaughter, Miss Honoria Beaumont, a pleasant enough girl with £40,000 and very little to say for herself, whom Lady Priscilla had determined, some winters back, would make Julian a suitable duchess, and had not yet abandoned the project for want of encouragement from Julian himself. Lady Priscilla laughed like a small bell struck 3 times, always 3, never more nor less, and used the sound the way other people used a closed door. It happened in the long gallery, on the 2nd week of December, with Miss Beaumont present and 2 of the upper servants, and, unluckily, the Duke himself at the far end examining a portrait he had no real interest in, that Grace, carrying a tray of glasses through on Mrs. Dell's errand, caught her foot on a raised board and set one glass rocking, which she righted before it fell, spilling nothing, though her hand, she noted with private irritation, was not perfectly steady after. "Good gracious," said Lady Priscilla, and laughed her 3 notes. "One does hope the new girl is more careful with the silver than with her own feet. Though I suppose one cannot ask elegance of a shopkeeper's daughter. It is not bred in, whatever else may be taught." She turned to Miss Beaumont with a smile that included her in the joke, and excluded everyone else from it. You can always tell the ones who have had to work for their bread. It shows in the hands. Look at them, poor thing, red as a goose's foot. Grace set the tray down, very carefully, on the nearest table, because her hands had gone tight around it, and she did not trust them with glass a moment longer. "They are red from work, my lady," she said, "which I understood to be the purpose you keep me for." She did not raise her voice. She did not curtsy the apology that was plainly wanted. She picked the tray back up when her hands had settled and went on with her errand, and did not look to see what face the Duke was making at the far end of the gallery, though she felt, without looking, that he had turned from the portrait entirely. Lady Priscilla's bell did not ring again that afternoon. "You did not answer her as she wished," the Duke said later, finding Grace by chance, or what she took for chance, restocking the library grate. "Most would have wept, or apologised for existing." "You did neither. Fair is not the same as kind, your ladyship's kind," Grace said, and then heard herself, and stood a little straighter. "I beg pardon. I ought not to speak so of a guest of the house. You ought to say true things whether or not they are convenient," he said. "It is a rarer habit than you might think, in this house or any other." He was quiet a moment, looking at the fire and not at her. "I knew a woman once who wept very prettily, and was cruel to a servant the moment she believed herself unwatched. It taught me to trust tears rather less than I once did, and plain speech rather more." Grace did not ask who the woman had been. Something in the flatness with which he said it told her the door was open only a very little way, and that pushing at it further was not yet hers to do. She did not know, going back to her work that evening, how near she had come to hearing the whole of it. She only knew that the man in the library had, in his own quiet fashion, just told her he was on her side of a ledger she had not known was being kept. The trouble came, as trouble in that house generally did, from Mr. Croft. And it came dressed as an accounting error. The steward had grown careless in his skimming over the years. A shilling here, a tenant's rent recorded twice, the difference pocketed and buried under enough ordinary business that no one had thought to look closely, until the quiet inquiries the Duke had begun after the night on the back stair started turning up small inconsistencies that would not, upon examination, go away. Croft, sensing the ground shifting under him before he understood exactly why, did what men of his stripe generally do when cornered. He looked about for someone smaller than himself to push the blame onto. He found the silver. A pair of candlesticks and a small sauce-boat, plate rather than true silver but valuable enough, went missing from the good dining room the week before Christmas. And Croft, called upon to account for the household's inventory, was ready with an answer before anyone had quite finished asking the question. "I have had my suspicions of the new girl some while," he told Lady Priscilla, who received this information over her morning chocolate with an expression of grim satisfaction that suggested it confirmed something she had believed all along. "Caught her once already about the house at unnatural hours, on an excuse of nursing the stable boy. A girl who will creep about a house by night, for one reason, will creep about it for another. It was not, strictly, a lie. It was merely every fact arranged to point the wrong way, which Grace was to learn, later, was a particular skill of his. She was called before Lady Priscilla in the small parlour that same afternoon, and Croft stood by the door with his hands folded, and an expression of great personal sorrow at having to say what he was about to say, and the sauce-boat, she was informed, had last been seen the same week she had been observed on the back stair at an hour no honest girl had business being anywhere. "I did not take your silver," Grace said. "I have never touched it beyond polishing it." "That is precisely what a thief would say," said Lady Priscilla, not unkindly, which was somehow worse than if she had been unkind about it. "I am not a hard woman, Miss Hollis. I will not have you brought before a magistrate over sauce-boats. But you will go, and you will go without a character, and you will consider that mercy, given what Mr. Croft tells me of your habits." Grace did not. She wanted to, distinctly, for the first time in a long while, and did not, because weeping in that room would only have proved to Lady Priscilla something Grace did not intend to prove. She thought of the man in the library, and of the voice on the stair she had never seen a face to match, and understood, with a coldness that settled somewhere under her ribs, that to name either of them now. To say a gentleman intervened for me once, a stranger has been kind to me since, would only hand Lady Priscilla a new stick to beat her with, a maid claiming the protection of men she could not even name. She held her tongue on that, as on everything else, and asked only when she was to go. "The morning coach," said Lady Priscilla. "I am not a monster. You may have your box packed by then." Grace went up to pack it that night with hands that had finally begun, in private, to shake, and did not let herself think about Tom, who would not understand why she had gone, or about the library, which she would not see again, and told herself this was simply the shape her life had always taken, and she had no business being surprised by it now. Mrs. Dell found her folding her one good shawl by candlelight, and stood in the doorway some while before she spoke. "You are not to go, Mrs. Dell said. "I have been dismissed, Mrs. Dell. There is very little I can do about a thing already decided. There is a great deal that has been decided in this house without asking leave of the person deciding it," Mrs. Dell said, and came in, and shut the door, and sat herself down on the end of the narrow bed, with the air of a woman who had held her tongue as long as she meant to, and no longer. "I have kept a great many secrets in 20 years in this house, Miss Hollis, because it was not mine to tell them. I find I cannot keep this one, while you sit there folding a shawl to leave on a lie." "What lie?" "That you are a thief, and that no one in this house has troubled themselves over you." Mrs. Dell folded her hands. "Who do you suppose paid the physician for that boy in October?" "I do not know," Grace said. "No one would say." "His Grace," said Mrs. Dell, "the Duke himself, Miss Hollis, and not for the first time in this house nor the last, and always with the same condition attached, which is that his name never go with it. The rent quiet paid on 2 cottages this autumn that were behind, the boy's mother's debt at the shop, your own removal to the east wing, out of Mr. Croft's daily reach, which I did at his asking, and never told you why, because he asked me not to." Grace sat very still. "And the man on the stair," Mrs. Dell said, watching her face, "the one who stopped Croft that first night and never gave his name. That was his Grace as well." Miss Hollis. He has told me so himself, not 3 days past, in a manner I have never once heard him use of anything, which is to say, as though it cost him something to say it, and he meant to say it regardless. The gentleman in the library, Grace said slowly. Mr. Ashworth is the 9th Duke of Ferncombe, said Mrs. Dell, and has been sitting in that library across a dusting cloth from you 3 months running, letting you believe him a scholar's clerk, for reasons I expect he means to explain to you himself, if you will give him the chance before that coach takes you. Grace did not speak for a long moment. The candle between them had begun again to gutter, and the silver, she said at last. The sauce boat. Was found this evening, said Mrs. Dell, in Mr. Croft's own strong-box, along with a set of accounts he has spent 2 years falsifying, which his Grace's man has been quietly assembling since October, since a certain night on the back stair gave him reason to look closely at his own steward for the first time in some years. Mr. Croft will not be troubling this house again, nor, I think, will Lady Priscilla find it quite so easy to speak of thieves once she has heard the whole of it. Grace found that her hands, folding the shawl a second time without meaning to, had gone steady again. He is downstairs, Mrs. Dell said, rising in the small study, not the library. He has been there the better part of an hour, and has not, to my certain knowledge, done a single useful thing with his time in it. The small study at Ferncombe was not much used, being too plain for guests and too warm, in winter, for a man who preferred, most days, the draughtier grandeur of the library. There was a good fire in it that evening, and one lamp, and the Duke of Ferncombe standing at the window with his back to the door, in a coat he had plainly put on and taken off and put on again, because his valet would have laid it straighter than that. He turned when she came in. He did not sit, and did not ask her to. I owe you the truth, he said, and I find, now that the moment is here, that I do not know how to give it to you plainly, which is a strange thing, since I have asked plain speech of you since the day we met, and had rather less of my own to offer in return. Grace said nothing. She had learned, a long time ago, that silence generally got her further than questions did. I stood at the top of the back stair the night you went down to the stables, he said. I had not slept. I saw your candle cross the yard, and I followed it as far as the landing, and I do not, to this hour, know why I did not simply go back to my bed and let the house manage its own business, except that I did not want to. When Croft had you against the wall I spoke because I could not do otherwise, and then I went away again, before you could see my face, because I told myself that was restraint, and I am no longer entirely certain it was not cowardice. You let me believe a stranger had helped me, Grace said, and then you let me believe a stranger was reading in your own library. Yes, why? He was quiet a moment, and she saw, for the first time since she had known him, that he was choosing his words the way a man chooses his footing on ice. Because I wanted to see who you were, he said, when you believed no one of any consequence was watching you. I have been made a fool once already by a woman who wept beautifully in company, and was cruel the instant she thought herself unobserved, and I swore, after that, I would never again mistake manners for character. You did not know I was a duke the night you went down to that boy with your own bread in your pocket. You did not know it in the library, when you told me plainly that my Latin was worth less than your father's poultices. You have not known it these 3 months. You have spoken your mind to me, as though I were merely a man with time on his hands and an interest in books. That is the only test I know that tells the truth, and you have passed it every day since October, without once knowing you were sitting it. You might have told me, she said, before it cost me my place and very nearly my name. I know it, he said, and for the first time she heard something in his voice come apart a little at the seams. I let it go on a week longer than I should have, out of a cowardice I am not proud of, because I did not know how to say it without it sounding like a bribe, a duke's confession offered to a maid about to be turned out, as though the title were meant to buy back what the silence had cost. It was wrong of me. I will not dress it as anything else. Grace looked at him a long while. The fire popped once and settled. "What do you want of me?" she said, "now that it is said?" "Nothing tonight," he said. "That is the whole of what I came in here to tell you, and I find I have taken a great many words to say a small thing. I do not want your gratitude, and I do not want your yes because a coach was waiting and a duke has offered you a way to miss it. I would rather have your no, freely given, than a yes you felt you had no choice but to give me. Stay the winter, if you will stay it as Grace Hollis and nothing else. Go in the spring, if you still wish to go. I will not ask again before then, and I will not hold the asking against you either way." "And if I wished an answer tonight," she said, "instead of waiting for the spring?" "Then I would want it to be true," he said, "more than I would want it to be quick." She thought of the back stair, dark and narrow and unlit past the second landing, and of a voice in it that had cost her nothing and asked nothing, and of a library where a plain man had asked her exact questions about apothecaries' daughters, because he had already decided, before she knew he was deciding anything, that she was worth the asking. "I should like to be spoken to plainly from now on," she said. "Whatever else is decided. I have had enough people arranging what I am to know, and when. I will not be lied to again, Your Grace, not even kindly, not even for my own good." "You will not be," he said. "You have my word on it, and I find I mean to keep this one rather more carefully than I have kept my silence." "Then," she said, and found the word came easier than she had expected, "I do not think I need the spring to know my own mind." It was a short question, when you finally asked it honestly. It did not want a long answer. "That is not an answer," he said, and something in his face had begun, unmistakably, to come undone in a way she had not yet seen it do. "That is a description of an answer." "Yes," she said. "It was the only word I needed." He crossed the room to her then, slowly, as though giving her every step of it to stop him if she chose, and took her hand, and drew the glove from it finger by finger, slowly, the way a man draws out a thing he does not want to be finished with, and pressed his mouth to her bare knuckles, red still from work, which Lady Priscilla had once called ugly, and which he had never once, in 3 months of watching her, thought anything but honest. "I will not always be easy," he said against her hand. "I have not had much practice at happiness." "Nor I," she said. "We may learn it badly together then, and no one need be lied to about how well we are managing it." He laughed at that once, briefly, a sound she had not heard from him before, and understood at once to be an event, the way Mrs. Dell had once told her a fire in a cold room is an event, and she found her own hand, ungloved now, closing around his without her having quite decided to let it. Mr. Croft did not stand trial. In the end, the Duke having no taste for a spectacle that would have cost the house more than the silver was worth, but he left Ferncombe within the week with a character that would open no good door to him again, and an understanding, plainly given, that his falsified accounts would go no further so long as he troubled no one connected with the house for the whole of his remaining life. Lady Priscilla, faced with the full accounting of what her steward had done in her own household under her own nose, and of what her goddaughter's prospects now plainly were, discovered a sudden fondness for Bath, and removed there before the spring, from which she wrote occasionally, in a hand grown considerably less certain of itself than her voice had ever been. Tom Rafferty mended through the winter, and was found, in the spring, to have a quick head for figures that no one had thought to look for in a stable boy, and was sent, at an expense no one troubled to name, to be schooled properly for a clerk's position, a fact he learned of only after it was already arranged, and which he accepted the way children accept good fortune, without asking too closely who had wanted it kept quiet. Grace Hollis became, that same spring, in a wedding a duke's rank made grand only in the arrangements and not in the substance of it, the Duchess of Ferncombe, and refused, on the single point she would not yield, to be married in anything but her own plain grey, which Mrs. Dell wept over more than the bride did. A year later, almost to the week, the back stair at Ferncombe held a lamp that had not gone out once since the autumn it was hung there, an ordinary thing, a bracket and a wicken glass to keep the draught off it, which nobody visiting the house would have thought twice about, and which the Duke had ordered fitted himself the week after the wedding, without explanation to anyone who had not been there the night it mattered. On a cold evening very like the one that had begun it all, Julian sat by the study fire, with his wife's bare hand in his, her glove set aside on the little table, where she always set it now without being asked, and Tom's letter from his first term open on her knee, full of figures he was proud of, and news of a master who found him promising. Somewhere above them a rook called once against the window, and was still. "You are thinking of the stair again," she said, not looking up. "I am thinking that I very nearly did not go down it," he said. "I have thought that more than once this year. And I am thinking," she said, "that I very nearly did not answer you honestly, out of habit, because honesty had cost me so little in my life before you." He did not answer that with words. He only tightened his hand around hers, which did not let go, and did not need to. It is a small thing, in the end, to be kind to what cannot repay you. It is, none the less, the only accounting that was ever worth keeping.